Now, what type of data you can store inside JavaScript? We are just currently in the variables, we are just currently storing integers, like kind of like numbers. But what different variables, or let's say what different values you can store inside JavaScript? What all values we can store in JavaScript, right? So the most accurate answer you will get from the official documentation of JS. What is a documentation? You can say that the people who contribute in the development of JS, who release new version of JS, they write a big set of documentation where they write all the features of JavaScript very in depth, right? So I would like to show you a piece of documentation. Just a second, let me load it on the screen. Also, just for a fun fact, MDN is not the official JavaScript documentation. It's documentation written by Mozilla. Official JavaScript documentation is given by ECMA International. Let me show you. Just a second. The second guy is loading the page. It's a heavy page, so it takes some time to load. So now this is the official documentation of JavaScript. So it's talk about ECMAScript data types and values. So as I already told you that JavaScript was earlier called as ECMAScript. So documentation is still released as ECMAScript. Right. If you see the ECMAScript language types, so it says that ECMAScript language types are undefined, null, boolean, string, symbol, number, object. Quite a few, right? Let's see. So in JavaScript, the most basic thing that you can store is number. For example, number like 10, -3, 2.6 decimal is also considered as number here, 3.41414, 100, 1000, right, etc. All of these are numbers. You can store numbers, right? The second important thing that you can store is string. Now there is a lot of things to learn in strings. Currently I'm just introducing strings, but later we are going to discuss tons and tons of things around strings. So strings are simply text. So what you can do, there are two ways in which you can have strings, technically three ways. One is you can have a pair of double quotes. This is like double quotes. Okay, you can have a pair of double quotes, and inside double quotes you can write any random text. For example, my name, Sanket. So this is to signify text. Let's say you have to write a long text, right? That's not a number, it's a text. So you have to write text as double quotes. Inside the pair of double quotes, you write the text. This is one way. Another way is you can even use single quotes. You can even use single quotes. Inside single quotes also you can write a random text. Random text. Okay. This is the second way. Third way is you can use a backtick. You can use a pair of backtick. So I'll show you what keyboard character is a backtick, but inside backtick also you can write some text. So texts are said to be as string. It's a general programming term. Wherever you hear the word string, that means we are referring to some text. Okay. So if you want to see backtick on your keyboard, right, then let me show you what key is a backtick or a backquote, right? Mm, see, uh, something like this. This is a backtick. This small one, this small one. The upper curvy one is a tilde. The one which is below is a backtick. Okay, it is generally below escape. It is generally below your escape. Okay. Uh, See, generally along with tilde you have it. Let's see. Let me see if you have any general computer one. Mm, see here also. This one along with one. To the left of one, this character below the curly one is a backtick or a back quote. Right? Backtick or a back quote. The double quotes, where are the double quotes? Let me show you the double quotes. So the upper one here, these are the double quotes, right? And below them are the single quotes. See, single quotes. So you can see single quotes are like kind of like forward, whereas back quote is like backwards. Okay. So using these three things, you can create strings, right? So first thing that you can store inside JavaScript is number. Second is string. Okay. Third thing that you can store, which is kind of very important, is Boolean. Now, what is Boolean? Now, in your elementary 10th, 11th classes, you might have heard about Boolean logics and Boolean gates and everything, right? So, Boolean means true or false. True or false. So, you can have true or false, right? True or false. These are technically keywords only. So, these are the keywords that represent a Boolean value. True means the like in Boolean circuits, true means current is going through, false means current is not going through. We have a Boolean value to signify a situation of 0, 1. Boolean generally means 0, 1. Whenever, let's say, we have to say that, is it raining? So it can be a true value or a false value, right? So computer talk a lot in terms of true, false, or 0, 1, right? So make sure true is all small because it's a keyword. You cannot like change the characters. This is all small. False is also all small. These are all small values, right? All small values. Okay. And again, are keywords. Fourth thing, fourth thing is undefined, right? Now, undefined is also a keyword only. Undefined is also a keyword only. Undefined is generally used to represent something that has not been defined yet, but may be defined later. Something not defined yet, but may be defined later. For example, let's say you have a login logout page. I'm just giving a random example. Let's say you have a login logout page. By the time user is going to enter an email, like, or let's say before the time the user actually enters the email and password, the email and password field are kind of like empty. So they are like undefined. They can get a value in future, but currently they are not having any value. So it's like undefined, right? There's like an advanced concept of being undeclared and undefined, but we are going to come to that later in scopes. But for the time, you can say that it is undefined. It is like a type. It is like a type. It's an option. You can now a lot of people can say I can also define uh, uh, instead of undefined, I can do something else. Yes, you can do something else, but it's like a convention. It's like something that JavaScript gives you as a feature that if you want to have a situation where you have not defined something, but let's say later maybe you want to define something, you can use undefined, right? Something which is currently not present is can be used as undefined. Okay. numbers, like if let's say you want to store the scores of the players, you can use numbers. If you want to uh, store the name of the players, you can use strings. If you want to show the situation of the game, whether the game is ended or game is going on, so you can use boolean, right? So using these different type of variables and their values, we can actually do this. For example, let's say if you want to store a number somewhere, one second, let me just close this. If you want to store the number somewhere, you can write something like where x is equals to 10. Okay. If you want to, let's say, store a string, you can say where name is equals to Sanket. If let's say you want to store a boolean, you can say where condition is equals to true. If you want to store undefined, you can say where status is equals to undefined, right? Just write undefined all small, just write undefined all small, right? This is how you can like even create the variables. So the next important data type that we are going to have is going to be, like, we are going to discuss about it in very much in depth later in the course also. There will be dedicated lectures specifically on this data type, but this is the fifth important data type, that is objects. That is objects, right? So let me open once again in front of you the ECMAScript language doc, right? So if I just quickly open ECMAScript documentations, right? Just a second, let it open. Okay, so let's go to data types and values. Just a second, let's go to data types and values, and you can see. So undefined we have talked about, string and boolean we have talked about, number we have talked about. The next important one is object, right? Next important one is object. So let's talk a bit about object. Although object is a very big topic in itself, a lot of things are going to be discussed about objects. But for the time being, you can assume that if we have to somehow store key value pairs, then we can use objects, right? So not only in JavaScript, but some other languages like Python and all, and a lot of languages do support this kind of a behavior where if you want to store key value pair, right? Key value pair, for example, let's say you want to store something like a key, and corresponding to a key, you want to store some value. For example, let's say you want to store name, and let's say the name is Sanket. Okay. Then let's say you want to store something like company, you want to say something like Google. Then let's say position, then let's say you want to say something like software engineer, right? And these values are of course kind of like a text, right? So let's say if you want to store a structure like this, something like this, where we have key and corresponding to the key we have value. So this structure is called as an object. Let me give you one more example. Let's say another example can be, let's say name is Sarthak. Let's say company is PhonePe. Let's say position is APM, right? So this can be another example. So whenever we have to store something like a key value pair, right? Keys are going to be unique. Keys are going to be unique. You cannot repeat the keys. Keys will be unique, right? So if you have to store a structure like this where we are storing key value pairs, in different situations we can have different key value pairs. For example, by just using a number or just using a string, we might not be able to define a complex entity like person. Let's say you are building the next big social media network, right? So you might have to store the data of a user. I'm just giving you a hypothetical example, right? If you want to store the data of a user, now you can't just define user with just maybe a name, right? User has a lot of things. User has a name, user has an email address, user has a password, user has some, let's say, contact information. A lot of things for just one user you have to store. How can you do that? So things like objects come into the picture, where if let's say this is somehow somewhat user one, this is somehow somewhat the user two, right? So if you want to store some complex entities where you are storing more than one property, and based on more than one property you create one complete entity that you can use or that you can store using objects, right? So let's take one more example. Let's say I want to store a product. So product will be having a lot of properties. Let's say product will be having a name. We can define the name of the product as a string. So see, I'm going to use a string which is already a data type to form the name of the product. So let's say iPhone. Then let's say I will say something like cost. So you can say 1,30,000. Right. This can be a number, not a text. This can be just a number. Right. Then let's say you have a property color. So let's say deep purple. Right. Let's say you have a property discount. Let's say 5. We are going to display discount in terms of integer, that much percentage or number, that is of some percentage, right? Let's say there is going to be some description of the product, right? This description can be the new Apple iPhone, something like this. So this is going to be a complex entity. In order to show one complete product, you need multiple things. See, we are using a number also to denote a cost. We are using a string also to denote the name. So other data types we are still using, but using these other data types, we are building a complex entity. This complex entity, where we are storing things in the form of key value pairs, key value, key value, key value is an object. So wherever we have to store a situation, or wherever we have a situation where we have to store key value pairs, where we can show complex entities, that's going to be done using a JavaScript object. And these objects are going to be of quite some relevance in your development journey as well. And when you are going to do data structures and algorithms, then also object, right? So when you say that an object is formed by combining multiple simple properties, then just think about it. If you want to create an object, then these key value pairs are somehow somewhat going to be of some numbers or strings or maybe some boolean, right? Something like this. But to define a boolean, we don't need anything else, right? If you want to define a boolean, that's a boolean, true, false. Boolean doesn't depend on a number. A number doesn't depend on a boolean. A string doesn't depend on a boolean or undefined things like these. Can I say that? So the simple properties, these simple properties are defined by types called as primitive data types. So here there is a fun fact and a new knowledge that I'm going to give you, that there are two types of data types: primitive and non-primitive. What is primitive? Primitive means which are atomic in nature. Types which are atomic in nature. Types which are atomic in nature. Atomic in nature means that they doesn't depend on anything else. For example, numbers. If you have to define a number, you don't need a string, right? So they are atomic. They can exist themselves. They can exist themselves. Whereas if you talk about a non-primitive, so types which are a composition of other types. Types which are a composition of other types. For example, object. So to create an object, we have to use other properties or other primitive data types as well. And fun fact, and let me give you one fun fact. So let's say that I am defining the next big Facebook, maybe something like that. So let's say I am having a user data. In my user data, let's say I'm having name of the user. So let's say name of the user is Sanket. Then let's say I'm having age of the user. So let's say my age is 24. Let's say I'm having something like posts of a user. Now, a user can make a lot of posts, right? On facebook.com, twitter.com, you make a lot of posts, you make a lot of tweets, right? Now, you cannot just simply define a post, right? Or you cannot just simply define a tweet. This post can be a complex entity, right? Because this post can have different piece of data. Now, this post can be an object in itself. For example, there will be a creation date created at, so some date, let's say June 12th, 2022. Then there will be some text of the post that, let's say, my first post. Something like this. I'm skipping things, only two properties, that when this post was created and what was the text of this post, right? And there can be a lot of such posts. For the timing, I'm just keeping one post just to demonstrate things. Then let's say I can have more properties. For example, let's say gender. I can have a gender property. Let's say that male, right? And so on. So now you see why I am calling objects as non-primitives, because object depends on other types. Inside an object, you see you have a string also getting used, you have a number also getting used, and you have an object also getting used. So you can have an object inside an object, right? So this level of nesting, this level of complexity you can introduce. Although in the initial days of programming, you don't need to do these much things, but later when you will start learning development with JavaScript and everything, these kind of structures are going to be quite relevant for you. So that's why we have objects, where we want to define much more complex entities that are not just numbers or strings or boolean, but they are going to be a complex composition of simple primitives and even sometimes internal objects also. That is what the difference between primitive and non-primitive data types.